He was the hardest working man I've ever met, and I could not keep up with him. I mean, I thought I was in great shape playing football, and I could not keep up with him. But what I was able to do, he had constantly telling me stories about different things, and that really helped me understand who he was.
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. I've spent my whole life discovering the power of family history, and I know that sharing the stories that live in you can change everything. By now, you know me as a storyteller, but I have not yet introduced you to my storyteller, the person in my life, or one of the people in my life, who filled my life with stories so much that it was inevitable that I would become a storyteller. And that's my dad. My dad and I have always been close, but never closer than we have over the last handful of years. As he has come into retirement and has dived headfirst back into family history, we've had the opportunity to really connect over that. So much so that he is no longer just my father, he's also become one of my best friends. And yet I still feel a little bit like a little girl every time I get to sit with him and hear him tell stories. Now, you're going to hear him tell some stories, and there's going to be a whole host of characters, and I don't expect you to be able to keep track of all of them. Here's what I do need you to know in order to enjoy my dad and his storytelling, which is that he loves his family. This man has not only instilled in me a love of story, but a love of family that is so powerful. And I think just spending a few minutes with him, you're going to feel that, and you're going to start to understand that in a way that for you might be a little bit new. So as you listen to my dad tell his stories, as you listen to our conversation, what I hope that you'll take from this is that you should be talking to your children. You should be telling your family stories as much as you can. You should be reminding them about who their parents were and who their grandparents were and who their great-grandparents were. I want you to be telling those stories. And much like you may struggle to keep track of who everyone is as you listen to us today, your children will too in the beginning. But very quickly, they'll come to know those people as individual characters in their story. And so whether they've ever met great Grandma Mary or not, they will come to know her because you knew her and loved her. And that is what my dad has to offer as a storyteller. Dad, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I like being here.
So I want to hear your version of how you got into family history.
It started really when I was very, very little. My parents took all of us to family reunions on a regular basis. My dad's side of the family had a family reunion from the time I can remember. And we'd go every summer, and I would see all these cousins of my mom and their children and their grandchildren and so on and so forth. And I can remember when I was 5 years old, sitting at the feet of my great-grandmother, Amanda, and listening to stories from her about her ancestors. And what I started doing as then a young child is trying to figure out who all these people were. You know, how do these all fit together? I'm a very logical math person. That's who I am. And so I have these, my grandmother with her grandfather with his 12 siblings. And I met, I think, almost every one of them at these reunions. And I was trying to figure out all these cousins of my mom, because she has on her dad's side something like 90 or 60 some cousins, and I'm trying to figure out who they all are and who they go to which, and that was interesting to me. And then I'd hear all their different stories of things they'd done or not done, and that interested me. And then later in life, when I turned about, I think it was like 14, I was playing football in high school, and I was trying to stay in shape one summer, and so my mom suggested that I work with my grandfather for a summer and he was a gardener. And I thought, okay, my grandfather was like 60 years old at the time, and here I am at 14 or 15, and I think, oh, this would be great. I can, do the things he can't do. And that was wrong. Um, as you know, well, yeah, you met Grandpa.
I did know Grandpa. Yeah.
He was the hardest working man I've ever met, and I could not keep up with him. I mean, I thought I was in great shape playing football, and I could not keep up with him. But what I was able to do, he had constantly telling me stories about different things, and that really helped me understand who he was, because he started out as a dairy farmer and had worked at a frozen food packing plant for several years, and now he was a gardener, taking care, and he did excellent work. And he would tell me all these different stories, and it just resonated with me that everybody has a story, and I loved hearing those stories. I didn't do much about it until I got home from my mission, when I had a little more time, and was married, and we started sitting down and filling out the old family group sheets and the pedigree charts and starting to figure out all this. But the thing that I guess interested me the most is when I'd find out, I'd get information that others had given and find out, hey, wait a minute, that's not quite right. And then I had to figure out how to change that and present it. So my journey in family history has been from the time I was about 4 or 5 years old, well, until today. I mean, I still am very involved in it, but I had a break period where I was a career and raising kids and just didn't do as much as I would have liked to have done. And now that I'm retired, I try and do it as often as I can.
I love that. I love that you tell stories, and have done that my whole life, about these people that you knew, and you took us to the family reunions when we were little. And of course, by then, it was another generation of people, which is partially what got me interested in family history as well. The same as you. I'm not a math brain, but I have a logic brain, and I want to piece all the puzzle pieces together and figure out, who you are and who you go with and how I'm related to you. And that was always fascinating to me. From those reunions as a kid, did you have a favorite relative?
I still had a favorite, and I think he was probably everybody's favorite, and that was Uncle Louie.
He was my favorite when I was a kid.
He was everybody's favorite, and he was a lot of fun. And he's actually the one that asked me to be the secretary of the Heaps family organization. So it was fun getting to know him that way as well. And he was a lot of fun. My Uncle Wally, my mom actually introduced, and he's my great uncle, by the way. So he's my mom's uncle, and he introduced him to his wife because my mom knew her. So Wally was close to my mom's age because Grandma Mary was the oldest of the 11 children. And so, and Wally was one of the younger ones. So family dynamics were different. My grandpa was in the middle of his family. My grandma was in the oldest of this family. So the dynamics were different in those two families. But each of them had people that I loved and learned a lot from over the years.
Loved Uncle Louie, loved Uncle Wally. I still remember when the 1930 census came out, and one of the first people I went and looked for was your mom and her parents. And she was she was 8 years old, living with them in Los Angeles with her younger sister, and Uncle Wally was living with them. And I took it to Ma, and I said, why is Uncle Wally living with you guys? Because it's her uncle. And she told me this story about how he got in a lot of trouble as a kid.
He did.
And at one point, his parents told him that if he didn't shape up and go to school and, behave, that they were going to send him to live with his sister. The threat was not that they were going to send him to live with your Grandma Mary. The threat was that they were going to send him to live with her husband, Grandpa Victor, who could work you in circles at 14. And so, 30 years earlier probably was exactly what Uncle Wally needed to keep him in line.
It's interesting when you talk about Grandpa Victor and Grandma Mary, the dynamics of those two. It was really interesting because I worked with him one-on-one, and so I got to know him. And he was a hardworking man, but he never said much, ever, when I was growing up. That he was always out working in a shop or doing something, He wouldn't eat hot food, for example. Everything had to be stone cold before he would eat it. He loved spicy foods. Just he loved my wife's chili. But he was just a very quiet man. But if you got out of line, no, you didn't get out of line with Grandpa. You just didn't. Grandma would love you to death, and Grandpa would discipline. I mean, he just by a look or just he'd put you to work if you didn't. So yeah, that was interesting. And Uncle Wally was not the first person that was sent to Grandma and Grandpa to take care of. There was always cousins or aunts and uncles living with them because they were they were the controllers of the family. They really were.
So you grew up in this family, right, on your mom's side with literally almost, I mean, she has more than 100 cousins, I think, total between the two sides of her family, first cousins.
I've never really counted it, but yeah, it's somewhere around 100.
Yeah. But your dad's family was very different.
Yeah, my dad came from a family where he had an older sister and a younger sister, and that was it. Grandma Cowan was one of 4 girls. They had brothers, but they all died fairly young. And then Grandpa Cowan, who I never knew. I never met my grandfather. He died, actually, he died right after my parents got married. And he came from a family with 1 brother. That's it. And so that brother of Grandpa Cowan had 4 daughters that we didn't even know about for years. In fact, I think you've talked in some of your other podcasts about the family reunions we go to. We went to one this last week, and that's where we met the families of those 4 daughters. We'd met them before, but that was a good reunion to them. So we didn't know them. So all we had was my Aunt Dorothy and my Aunt Madeline. My Aunt Madeline never married, and my Aunt Dorothy had 2 children. So I have 2 cousins on my dad's side of the family, or I have 21 on my mom's side. So it totally different dynamics. Grandma Cowan was the matriarch and ruler of the roost. In fact, she called my dad Sonny, which is a different story altogether. And my grandmother Mary was kind of the loving, nurturing type of, and my grandpa Victor was just, he was there. And when he'd come into the house to rest, he'd sit down and he'd tell stories or fall asleep, one of the two.
Sometimes both at the same time.
Yeah, he'd be telling a story and fall asleep in the middle of the story, wake up and start and go right where he was before. Yeah, Grandpa Victor I loved him dearly. He was a witness at a witness at our wedding. So yeah.
It's also interesting because you can kind of tell just by the way you talk about them. It was Grandpa Victor and Grandma Mary on your mom's side, and Grandpa Cowan and Grandma Cowan on your mom's side.
Grandma Cowan required us to be very formal, very proper. Everyone was aunt and uncle, grandma and grandpa. And yes, it was very formal. On my mom's side, even our aunts and uncles, we called them Irma and Winnie, we called them Phyllis and Bob, and we didn't call them aunt and uncle, it's always Aunt Madeline and Aunt Dorothy. And it just, very formal differential there.
And so your parents, having come from these 2 different environments, right? They come together to form a family. And I loved my grandparents. And what I know about your dad is that he fully embraced your mother's family.
Mm-hmm.
And loved being a part of that vibrancy and chaos and all the people, all the time, and all the stories.
My dad was very gregarious, extremely gregarious. He loved people. He loved meeting people. His job, he worked for the city of Los Angeles for like 30 years. And he designed streets in Los Angeles. But his job was to meet with people that come to the counter. So he was meeting public all day long. And then he'd go out and inspect jobs and meet with people outside. And he was just loved people and loved being around people. And so, when he'd go to the family reunion, Mom would sit in the corner talking to different people. Dad would be out playing horseshoes, going swimming, just talking to anybody and everybody that was there. And so, they were totally different people, but he embraced Mom's side of the family wholeheartedly, and everybody loved my dad.
Your mom, however, was not embraced by your dad's family in quite the same way.
If my grandma Cowan had had her wish, partly because her husband died when she was so young, but if she had had her wish, all three of her children would have stayed at home. None of them would have gotten married. My dad was the first one to get married, and there were several problems with that. Number one was she didn't want him to get married. Number two is my mom was a different religion. My grandma Cowan was a Lutheran. As my Aunt Madeline said in her will when she died, I was born a Lutheran, I lived a Lutheran, I'm going to die a Lutheran. My grandma Cowan had this similar attitude. And here my dad marries a Mormon, and it threw her for a loop.
Married, Mormon, and she was a redhead.
And she was a redhead. That's why I say that there were several things. It all kind of fit together. And so it was interesting when my parents, and they went and visited grandma all the time. I mean, my dad was very close to his mother, and she was a widow, and so he felt it was a responsibility to take care of her. So they went there all the time. And my grandma would come up to my dad, sitting right next to my mom, and said, "Would you please ask your wife what she'd like to drink for dinner?" And would never talk to my mother. For years, this went on. And my mom endured it. Grandma got to the point where she would talk to her. I think it's when Sandy was born, my oldest sister. Grandma Cowan kind of loosened up and was
grandchildren made the difference.
Grandchildren make a difference. And then the real difference, another story. Grandma Cowan was born to German immigrants. And they didn't speak English, and so Grandma spoke fluent German. But when she got married, after World War II, actually is when it occurred, she decided, I don't want to speak German because there's a stigma in the United States with Germans at that point in time. And so she would not speak German at all. So when I knew her, she would not, the only German I ever heard her speak is when she'd say thank you, she would say Dankeschön. That's the only German I ever heard from my grandma until you were born. And then all of a sudden, Sue would take you over to her house at least once a week, and she would sit and sing German lullabies to you. And she spoke German to you. And it was you made a whole change in her. I'm sorry she didn't live longer to see the rest of the kids, but you got to see that.
I have vague. It's actually probably one of my earliest memories because she had a sweater that she would wear. I think it was pink and it was scratchy because she would hold me when she would sing those German lullabies and the sweater would scratch my face. It's one of my earliest memories in life.
Yeah. Grandma was a unique individual. She loved us. We knew she loved us, but she didn't show it.
She wasn't warm.
No, she wasn't warm and fuzzy like Grandma Mary at all.
Well, growing up in this environment of family reunions and family stories, and even though your two sets of grandparents were very different, they both lived close to you in Los Angeles. And so they were around a lot most of your life, all of your life. That then translated into how you raised your children and how you taught us and how we interacted with family history growing up. Even before that, you and Mom, when you were at school, took family history classes together. The way that I tell the story is my dad was an accounting major. My mom was an English major. They were fairly newlyweds with me as a new baby and decided to take one class together a semester. So you had some time together. Is that an accurate retelling?
Close. Mom was not an English major until she went back to school after everyone was born and raised. She was a family, let's see, I got to think of the exact
Child
term.
and family
Child
development,
family relations is what her major was. We decided we'd take one class together every year. It happened to be most of the time those classes, we talked to the professor before time. He, especially in one class, he encouraged us to bring you with us. So we took you to the classes there at BYU. Otherwise, we would pass you off between classes because we were both going after you were born. And then we had a good friend that we would, when we went to the class together where they wouldn't let us bring you in, then yes, we would have somebody that would take care of you on campus because we lived actually about 3 miles from campus. But what we did was we scheduled our classes so we took the bulk of our classes on Monday through Thursday, and then I think I had one or two Friday morning classes that I had to take, and then Friday afternoon we'd get out of school, grab a quick bite to eat, and head up to Salt Lake City and go to the what at the time was called the Genealogical Library there in Salt Lake City, and spend the afternoon and into the evening doing research on microfilm and microfiche and the reels and just dug into a lot of that.
And again, the way I tell the story is,
Yes, and it's true.
my parents would take me to the family history library and shove my baby carrier under a microfilm reader. And so somehow I became a genealogist by osmosis.
You did. Yeah, I claim the same thing. You got a lot of this by osmosis from me.
I love that. So after you graduated from BYU and started your career, and life happens, right?
Yes, it does.
But you stayed involved in both family history and genealogy in different ways and encouraged your children to kind of do the same.
Absolutely. We still went to family reunions on a regular basis. We tried. When I graduated, I went back to LA, and I worked there for about a year and a half. And my wife and I decided, and we had you, and she was pregnant with our twins. And so we talked about it, and we decided we didn't want to raise you in Los Angeles. It just was not what we wanted to do in the 1970s. So I found a job up in the Bay Area. And so we moved up to the Bay Area, but we would constantly, in fact, when Sue because she was pregnant with twins, she was put to bed rest. Well, I was working full time. And I
broke my leg.
And that's right. You were on a jungle gym and going down a pole and slapped your leg against the pole and broke your leg. So she couldn't take care of you. I couldn't take care of her. So I talked to my parents, and they were more than happy to take her in. So one of the trips down to LA, I left her there, and I went back up to Gilroy, California, and worked during the week and go back to LA every Friday evening. And so we were close to family, and her mother was down in Orange County by then, and we'd go down there periodically. But even when we moved over to Central California and worked there, we'd still go home. I've always called Los Angeles home to me because I lived there the first part of my life. But yeah, we would visit family there. And we always tried to go to any of the family reunions that we had. We were actually closer to Uncle Louie when we lived in Central California. So it was just, family was important to me. And so we tried to stay as close to them. It's interesting, though, during that whole time, I kind of lost track of some of my cousins. The 21 cousins that I've got, I lost track of them during that period of time because they went all different directions as we were moving further and further north. So, but we tried to stay as close as we could to at least the grandparents and siblings that I have.
That's some of my favorite memories growing up are the 5-hour drives back and forth to LA, spending time with my grandparents. The two sets of grandparents, my two sets of grandparents lived about an hour apart, and so we would go stay with your parents, and then we'd drive down to see mom's mom, and just that. Just knowing that was home for me too a lot, because we moved around just enough that their homes were the constant in my whole growing up years. And not only that, but that every time I would go there, they had stories and they would share those stories so freely. And one of my favorite memories growing up would be sitting at Nana's breakfast table, and she would bring out a literal shoebox of pictures and just go through the pictures. She liked quiet and order. Your parents' house was often chaos and love and fun and cookies from the freezer. Nana's house was clean and orderly and quiet, and if you're going to make noise, go outside. And so I think she often did that just to keep us quiet. but that was one of my favorite memories, was sitting and going through her photos and hearing those stories from her. And so when I found the secret closet at your parents' house that had all the pictures, because I had been kind of trained into that by Nana, then I started asking Ma and Pa questions about the people in their family. And they weren't as willing to sit and go through pictures, but they always were willing to share stories.
Yes, they were. And you brought up a thought to me. You're the one who named your grandparents. Mm-hmm. You were the first grandchild at least on my parents' side. but Nana was always Nana. But you couldn't say Grandpa and Grandma, so they became Pa and Ma, or Ma and Pa, and they put that on everything after that. So, but yeah, they had my dad loved to take pictures. I mean, he had so many pictures that he took because we did a lot of travel and vacations together as a family. My dad was very, very much family oriented in everything he did, and he wanted to somehow keep a memory of those, and pictures are the best way to do it. And yeah, he didn't like going through pictures. That was not neither of them. Well, Mom did a little more, but Dad didn't like that at all. He would put the slides in and watch a slideshow, but pictures was not his thing. But you bring a picture and say, "Who is this?" He'll tell you who it is. Although my mom always said my dad slept through his childhood, so he didn't remember a lot of things when he was little. But he would know what a lot of people are. And I can only remember one time going to Texas to meet his family that still lived there. So I didn't know any of those people at all. And so it was good hearing, when you would ask questions, it was good hearing those stories, because I just was, as a child, busy and didn't really ask those questions. You had that from the time you were little. You would always ask, who's this and who's this and who's this? And that was good. I learned a lot too during those times.
Yeah. Another memory from my childhood is in Nana's house, she always had a portrait of Grandpa Woody. He died when Mom was a teenager, and I didn't know him, but through her, I got to know him. But she had a very prominent portrait of him in her home. Mm-hmm. But other than the shoebox, not a lot of pictures around her house. And then your parents, I don't remember, I remember, I think, a little curio cabinet that had a couple of photos on it of childhood pictures of Ma, and maybe a picture of their wedding picture. Mm-hmm. But other than that, not a lot of photos around their home. In the home I grew up in, you and Mom both always had walls and bookshelves of family pictures. Was that a conscious thing?
Yes, it was. We because family was so important to both of us. And when we got married, she assimilated my family immediately and wanted that big family. And I've told the story many times that before we got married, we sat down and separately decided how many children we wanted, and we came up with the exact same number, which was 13. and so we wanted a big family. That's what we wanted. We couldn't. It worked out we only could have 5, but the 5 best kids I've ever had. So, but we wanted you to know about your family. When I was little and we'd go visit Grandma Cowan, my parents would play with Grandma Cowan and Aunt Madeline cards and they'd put us to bed. Well, I would sleep in Grandma's bed, and above her bed were the pictures of her parents, Julius and Anna. And so I went to sleep, thinking about those, because I watched them all the time. So when Grandma died, the one thing I asked for it was 2 things. I asked for the chandelier that was in her dining room that I remember constantly, and those 2 pictures. And so when Dad said, absolutely, you can have those, they now sit above our piano and have for years. And we want you to know who they are. We wanted our children to know who family is and how they're important to us.
Yeah, that is what I remember, is being surrounded by family, not just physically, but also through those pictures and through that constant reminder of who they were. It also made me more curious about them as people. I think sometimes we see a name on a pedigree chart, whether it was a paper one from the 70s or now on a computer, on a family tree online, and sometimes they're just names and dates and places. Having those pictures was super meaningful. Having the stories was even more meaningful, and it led me to know those people. Like, I talk about my Grandpa Woody as if I knew him, because I do, because so many stories were shared with him, because that portrait hung right inside Nana's front door practically. Like, that was so important to me to be able to come to know those people in that way. And so thank you for raising me that way.
We're glad the way you turned out. Believe me, we're happy with all of our children. And it's important. Family is important.
So one of my memories is when I was about 12 years old, you got a computer and loaded the first DOS-based genealogy software program on it.
PAF.
Yes. Personal ancestral file.
Yes.
And grabbed the box of family genealogy that you'd been carting around with us through moves throughout California and invited me to take that information and computerize it, do the data entry. And that's what I then spent any spare time I had as a teenager doing, usually side by side at a desk with you, so that I could ask questions. And again, like conscious choice to do that, or was that just, oh, here's some free labor?
Probably a little bit of both. As an accountant, I am probably one of the faster people on a 10-key ad. I don't have to look at the keypad, and I can just fly. On a typewriter, I'm two fingers, one on each hand, and I hunt and peck. And I'm not a fast typist. I tried to teach myself one time, and it just didn't take. Sue is a very fast typist, but she was raising kids, and she was, had so many things going on in church and community, and she just didn't have time. So when you showed an interest in family history, which you had done most of your life, I thought, give her a chance to learn these people, and the best way to learn them is to input them in, so you know where they are in the family. So yeah, it was a conscious decision in the fact that I didn't want to do it. It's not that I didn't want to. I was not good at it, and I tend to do things that I'm good at. We all do, I think. And you had a knack for it, and you loved it, and you did it for first few times. And I thought, well, I didn't give you the whole book. I didn't give you everything and say, go after it. I said, here, why don't you try this page or do this page and see what you come up with? And you came back asking for more. And so I just kept feeding you.
And plus, I'm a really fast typist.
Yes, you are.
That became kind of this thing with you and I, where you would feed me information or sit at the desk next to me as I did this for 5 years of my life. And then I left for school, and you got busy in your career, and you kind of drifted away from family history. Uncle Louis died, and the family reunions kind of petered out.
Right.
And so at one point you decided you wanted to get back involved in family history.
Yeah. And I'm not sure exactly when that occurred. I think you took a couple of family history classes. And then our other daughter, Angela, did the same thing. And Cameron had done a family or a pedigree chart for school, for a project or something. And each of you had different interests. And I thought, okay, I need to start doing that. So yeah, I started dabbling a little bit in it, and not doing a lot, but just getting started with it. And then in 2012, DNA came out.
Yeah.
And that just lit a spark in me, and you started showing me things that I could do with that. And that was just, I got excited about family history again.
It's because it was math.
That's exactly precisely. Yeah, it was. I loved the math side of it. As Krista teases me all the time, I have a spreadsheet for almost everything, and I started spreadsheets of what I wanted to work on and what I needed to do and where I needed to go in the family history with the DNA. And all of a sudden, not only that, but I got a real interest in who these people were, not just where they fit in my family and how I'm related, but who are they? How did they get to where they? We went to a family reunion, as we've talked about last week, and the one question that both sides of the family, or both family reunions, asked is, how did you get to where we were raised Lutheran, you're now Mormons? How does that work? And so we had to trace that for them. And then, well, how did you get from Prussia to California?
To Texas, to California.
Yeah, well, we were all in Texas. So I had to tell them the story about how we got to California. And so, you got to know your family to tell those stories. So that really interested me. And the further back I go, the further I want to know, how did they end up there? It started with my parents. My dad was born in San Francisco. My mom was born in Idaho Falls. How did they get together? And they'd tell me the story, and, they worked together at Douglas Aircraft in Los Angeles. That's how they got together. So that interests me, how that works. And then when you and I started working together, all of a sudden we'd say, well, how did these people meet? They were here and back in 1860 or 1870. How did they get together when they weren't anywhere near each other? So we'd trace where they'd move. And that really is an interest to me as well. And so that was fun.
Yeah. So you mentioned us working together. What year did that start?
2016.
So 2016, you hadn't yet retired.
Nope.
So we both work full time, but we decided Sunday nights was a great time to do family history.
Yes.
You live in Oregon. I live in Utah. I travel quite a bit for work. At least I did back then. You traveled occasionally for work or for vacations. Every Sunday, though, we decided no matter where we were in the world, we were going to get on FaceTime and work on family history. And we don't start it until 9:30 p.m. Utah time.
8:30 Oregon time.
And we usually spend, it started with 3 hours and then it went to 4. And now I think we're up to about 5 hours every Sunday night, which is delightful. Still means I have to get up for work on Monday mornings, though.
So did I for the first few years.
But worth it, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
and mainly we focus on figuring out who our DNA matches are. Tell me about what that means to you that we do that.
The first thing it means to me is I at least once a week, I get to talk to you. I mean, that I know is going to happen. Number two is when we first talk, Sue's on the phone with us usually, and we talk about what we've done or what's going on in our lives or what's important, what's bothering you. We have anywhere from, usually it's about a half hour to an hour that we talk about life and what's going on. And that to me is, if I could give anybody advice, the best advice I give them is when your children leave and go away, stay connected to them because it's important. That's, again, family is so important. And then we get into the family history. And I've gone through, because now when I'm retired, I can spend during the week figuring out who is it that I'm interested in or how do we want to go. And so that's my job, is to kind of figure out where we're going to head when we get together. But then we can collaborate. We can talk about, different things. And I can be looking at one area, you can be looking at another area, and we can then come together and say, we're talking through this the whole time, and we can see each other's expressions. And sometimes we don't say a word for several minutes because we're both researching something, but it's that connection together that's so important to me, that we're doing this together.
Yeah. And that's something that a lot of people, I think, as they get into family history, it can be very isolating. When you're doing genealogy research, it's you on a computer at 2 a.m., bleary-eyed, and there isn't anybody around to ask those questions to. And so for me, that's one of the benefits of doing this together, is that talking through the logic problem that is figuring out how this DNA match fits into this family or how this couple in the 1870s got together and following migration paths and figuring out which angle to come at solving a family history problem from, having somebody to bounce those ideas off of, I think helps us make discoveries faster, and not just 1 + 1 = 2 faster, but like 1 + 1 = 5 faster, to be able to figure these pieces of this puzzle out that make up our family story.
That's what family history really is. As you get further and further back, is mysteries, solving mysteries.
Yeah, it's a little bit like a murder board, I often say. That sounds so gruesome.
Only it is gruesome, but that's, I think of the same thing. You're putting all these different names. I think last Sunday we had one where we were trying to figure out who the biological father was, and we had it down to one of 3 sons, and we couldn't. So we would put those 3 sons up on our virtual murder board and say, okay, could it be this one? Where is he? And yeah, it's solving a mystery, a murder mystery sometimes.
I love it. I love the mystery of it all, the puzzle of it all. I love the stories that come out. I love the time I get to spend with you. What's next? Like, when you think about family history and what it means to your family now and what it means to your family in the future, what's your hope for the future?
I track how many new matches we get every week, basically, and then I look at the number of matches we solve every week, and the matches that we're getting far exceed what we're solving by multiples. And I think, okay, in the future, is this going to slow down, or are we going to have ways to find things faster? And I think my idea is the more people who test, the more solutions we'll have. So I know you guys are up to 25 million
Ancestry DNA
Ancestry DNA
has
tests.
25 million. Yeah.
If you think of the world, it's a drop in the bucket. So if we could get that up to, like 250 million, we can solve things a lot faster. But I think more importantly, I hope that, I'm not going to live forever. So I know you'll carry this on, but what happens then?
Yeah.
I would hope that more and more people want to get interested in this and figuring out who's who and how we're all related. We need to be more connected with the people that we meet with and who are actually our relations.
You mentioned losing contact with your 21 first cousins through life, and we've made some intentional connections with them. But now they have children and grandchildren, and in some cases, great-grandchildren are starting to come. So that's exciting to me as a member of this family to not just recognize that we are connected as a human family, but to actually figure out the connection to people that are part of the same story that we are a part of.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for raising me the way that you raised me, and for being still deeply involved in this family history journey with me.
Well, thank you. I'm glad who you turned out to be, and I appreciate you a lot, and I love you.
Love you.